Hello and welcome to You Talking to Me. The internet is not going to be taxed in Hungary, at least not for now. That's what the government decided, and that's our topic today. So let me introduce my guests. It's Mrs. Julia Reda. She's a German MEP from the Pirates Party. Hello, Mrs. Reda.
Hello.
And Mr. Tibor Szanyi is Hungarian MEP from the Socialists and Democrats.
Right. Hello.
Hello and welcome. And we are joined by our colleague Maxime Paquet from RTBF, from our Belgian partner. Bonjour,
Hello.
Maxime.
Bonjour.
Mr. Szanyi, the Hungarian government kind of withdraw the tax, its plan for taxing the internet. It was after mass demonstrations in the street. Were these demonstrations really about the internet tax? Or were the people just expressing that they were not satisfied with the government of Viktor Orban?
Well, a bit both, but basically, I still believe that this was absolutely in the area of the whole internet tax debate. But if you don't mind, I would like to make some little amendments to this point, because the original proposal has not yet been withdrawn, which means that even yesterday the Parliament, one of the committees, namely the Cultural Committee, by the way, has dealt with the next year's budget, and within that framework, still the original text prevails, which means that in the administrative sense, nothing has been done by the government.
But the protests didn't go on.
Well, it is foreseen that on the 17th of November, when it's about a vote on that issue, in any case, there will be again some demonstration in Budapest.
Ms. Szanyi, Ms. Reda, excuse me, the planned tax was not very high. Do you really think that this would have reduced access to internet for many people?
I think the question has to be, first of all, why somebody would try to tax something that is generally beneficial for an economy. All the not just the citizens, but also the companies in Hungary are, of course, dependent on an internet. And most likely, if you are taxing such an infrastructure, the price for accessing it is going to rise. Usually, additional taxes are imposed on things that are considered harmful to society. For example, we put additional taxes on smoking or on environmentally damaging fuels or something like that. But the internet is really something that is benefiting society. And so you have to see, aren't there possibly other reasons why the Orban government is considering the internet harmful? And of course, there could be that people are using the internet for alternative sources of information, alternative media, and for criticizing the government.
Is that what you fear too, Mr. Szanyi?
Well, being very correct, we must also clarify that there is a certain tax on internet in Hungary, which is quite normal, the normal VAT, which is, by the way, not too normal in Hungary. It is now 27%. That's the general, that's the highest in the EU. So on the top of it, introducing some extra, even a very brutal extra tax on internet, it's horrific. And I think that those people who were out protesting on the streets, they were fighting for their right, which means a kind of equality, that at least the conditions so that to get to the internet services must be more or less the same and similar in Europe. And if the government would put a heavy tax on the internet services, then it's going to harm really the mental and other liberties as well.
Although Hungary would have been the first country, I guess, in the world to introduce such a tax, the idea is not completely new. There was a Belgian professor thinking of something similar, and Maxime knows more about it. What was the idea of this professor?
Let me start from Mrs. Reda's point. Your point is to say, why tax something that is beneficial to the economy? That was exactly his point in the mid-90s. So his name is Mr. Luc Soete, he's a Belgian academic. What he was pointing at is, in the mid-90s, larger and larger parts of the economy were moving online, moving towards the internet, and larger parts of that economy were actually escaping tax. So actual VAT, as you mentioned, transactions, e-commerce, all those online transactions actually were escaping tax and were not part of the GDP, the gross domestic product. So his idea was we have to tax transmission of information online in the mid-90s. Things change a bit since then. We have to tax transmission of information online to actually take into account what we create nowadays, online activity. And that's a bit my question to you, Mrs. Reda, is actually, since the beginning, the Pirate Party says internet is a common good of public use. We have to create together this information society for the benefit of all. How can we do that if we do not take into account the richness that is created online?
I think the analysis that you're presenting is quite correct. Of course, we have to do something against IT companies escaping regular taxation. But I think the solution should not be to impose an additional tax on an infrastructure that is used both commercially and non-commercially. Instead, I think the solution shouldn't be found in such national taxes, but rather in a harmonization of the already existing taxes on a European level. So, for example, if an internet company can have its European address in one member state that has particularly low taxes and offer services to all of Europe, of course this is a problem. But I think we can tackle this through harmonization, just as in other areas, as we're trying, for example, with data protection.
I totally agree. This idea of tax is a bit of old-fashioned. But so you do agree that actually we should give money to political entities to actually create this information society you're talking about for the benefit of all?
Well, I do agree that governments should raise taxes on companies in principle. I just think that we should be taxing the actual companies. And if we have companies that are operating from a particular member state, it shouldn't matter which member state they're in. If we have a digital single market and we have IT companies, then they should be taxed equally, no matter where they decide to put their company headquarters. So, of course, also public money should go into infrastructure, into building out internet access in rural areas, for example. That I don't think is the issue here. I think that this particular tax is imposing a chilling effect on people, that they're going to think twice whether they're going to use the internet on a regular basis.
So coming back to Hungary, Mr. Szanyi, Mr. Orban announced to analyze whether it would be possible to keep part of the benefit that telecommunication companies make with the internet activities within the country. He announced also to organize a national consultation on this topic next year. What do you think of this idea?
Well, we had witnessed already some national consultation of Mr. Orban's type, which is practically rubbish. I mean, they just impose very artificially and very sophisticated questions, but giving at the same time on their own choice answers, and you are just free to find or take out any of the given answers, which means that it's not about your idea, but it's rather if you agree or not agree with certain sentences. But these are very tricky questions, so I would like really to avoid it.
Mrs. Reda, the new commissioner who is responsible for digital economy, Günther Oettinger, he is in favor of taxing search engines for using copyrighted material in their service, and you are against this proposal of Mr. Oettinger. Explain us why.
I think the problem, first of all, is that nobody really knows what exactly Oettinger is trying to propose. He mentioned in a newspaper article that Google should have to pay for using copyrighted content, but when asked about the specifics, he's remaining extremely vague. Now, we have had such an attempt in Germany just recently, where newspaper publishers said that Google should have to pay them for using little parts of their articles or pictures from the articles in their Google News service. And the reaction of Google was simply to exclude the newspapers from their search results in the news service if they wanted Google to pay. And what has happened now, even though the newspaper publishers convinced the government to pass this law, at the end of the day, they gave Google a free license to use the search results anyway, because the publishers actually want to be found on Google. So what has happened now is that a tax that was supposed to tax Google is actually taxing everybody else, everybody who's trying to make a new search engine, and Google has been reinforced as the dominant market player. And so I think you have to be very careful with such populist messages like saying we need to tax Google, because perhaps Google is quite unpopular in the German media at the moment. Mm-hmm. But the results of such an attempt can be really counterintuitive and counterproductive.
Okay, we are almost at the end, but I'd like to include a question from our Facebook page from Max, who is afraid that the internet causes a danger for democracy, given the fact that many laws are discussed in the net and that not everybody has access to it. Mr. Szanyi, what do you think of that?
Well, it's quite a different question than our original issue. I think that the best way would be if we could really enhance the development of the overall internet access facilities overall. There are quite a lot of municipalities who are just introducing services like free internet in the village, in the town, in the quarter, in the area, which must be encouraged, I think. And the debate is like something like this, that not everybody is having car, not everybody is having bicycle, but still you do something in favor of the motorists, and still you do something in favor of the bicyclists. So I think that the penetration of internet use in Europe is now roughly around 80% or even more, which means in practice that internet is for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Reda?
Yeah, nobody is actually suggesting to replace parliamentary democracy with discussions on the internet. And I think this is where this fear is perhaps coming from. I think there is a huge benefit to having a public discussion about laws before they are passed. And this particular example of the internet tax is showing that. And hopefully the protests on the streets are going to have the effect that this law is not passed in the end. But the final decision still has to be made by Parliament, and I don't think that democracy is in danger from having more discussion with the people.
We are going to follow the final decision in Hungary. Thank you very much, Mr. Szanyi. Thank you, Mrs. Reda. Thank you, Maxim, for joining us. Thank you all, and see you soon on You Talking to Me.